Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is taking heat for defending the human beingness of corporations. Let's watch.
Our friends on the other side act like corporations are not people. Well, what about all the people that work there? And all the people who have stock in their retirement accounts?
I mean, okay, there are in fact people who work at corporations, and this was, of course, an echo of his colleague Mitt Romney's famous comment during the presidential election, where he said, "Corporations are people, my friend."
Yes.
And for some reason, the "my friend" has always stuck with that as it has traveled through time.
This is a tonal thing, right? Because I don't think any of us would disagree that corporations have particular rights in the market and in our government. They do have rights, but it's the way that both Mitt Romney and Mitch McConnell, I think these are good parallels of each other, because it's the way that they sort of, it's almost gleeful. Like when Mitt Romney sort of was like, what's the best word for it is smug, right? When he was like, well, corporations are people, my friends. And then you have Mitch McConnell just being like, well, what about the people who work for them? And it's true, like there's a good point. The people who work for these corporations do benefit from them being able to be successful. The success of corporations, the problem, of course, is that we are in an era where the success of the corporation is wildly disproportionately benefiting the executives and the people at the very top and not the workers. And for Mitch McConnell to speak, and Mitt Romney to speak about corporations in that way without seeming to have any care about or interest in or knowledge of that broader context of what's really happening, that's where I think it gets troublesome.
Right, and he talks about not only the people who work for the corporations, and the people who work for the corporations who benefit are the vice presidents and above.
Yes,
not necessarily the lower wage workers. And he also talks about people who own stock. Only about half of people own stock, and certainly many fewer than that own stock in any particular corporation. Yet everybody is subject to whatever costs there are to this corporation doing business. The problem with this Mitt Romney McConnell formulation of that corporations are people is that, and Zach Carter, who wrote a biography of John Maynard Keynes recently, as he pointed out in response to this, the reason they're called corporations is because the word people was already taken. People describes a particular thing. Corporations are set up because they are a distinct thing. They have tremendous privileges, which such as being able to commit crimes and go bankrupt without, for the most part, the damage from that bouncing back onto the people who work in those corporations. And so what they want is they want all the privileges of being a corporation, but they also then want all of the rights of being a people, but they don't want any of the consequences that would fall upon them if they were actually considered people by criminal law.
Yeah, and there's the literal legal use of people is a different thing than a lot of people think about when they hear Mitt Romney say things like, well, corporations are people, my friends. It's a different thing, and it's amazing to see Mitch McConnell speak like that. To me, it's just amazing to see how Republicans continue to have no appreciation for the moment that they're in. And I'm not saying that Mitch McConnell should go full Josh Hawley, but the way that you're speaking about corporations, like, well, listen, there are people that work there. It speaks to the two Americas thing, right? That if you're saying, what about the people who own stocks? Well, again, as you point out, that's a chunk of the population. It's not the entire population. And if you live without having money in stocks and you live paycheck to paycheck, that is not, I'm not even talking about this on a messaging level, but on a substantive level, that is not really addressing something serious that workers need. And
there are so many ironies here. And one of them, we were talking earlier in the Hunter Biden segment about the legacy of corruption in this country. The Supreme Court justice who used the 14th Amendment, which was drafted after the Civil War to give equal protection and citizenship to freed slaves, the Supreme Court justice who used that to turn it into corporate personhood, was himself 100% on the take from the railroads. Like he was a bought and sold. Like other justices would even sometimes be like, maybe don't join this opinion because we know you're taking so much money from the railroad industry. And he was a extreme reactionary who actually was watching right around the time he was pushing this cause. He was watching the Paris Commune unfold. So the Telegraph had for the first time allowed Americans to follow what was going on in Europe day to day. So the Paris Commune, this massive takeover of France by this revolutionary element in 1873. He's watching this unfold. He's like, and people thought that it was going to happen here because there are all these railroad strikes. And so his railroad bosses are like, what are we going to do about this? He's like, we've got the 14th Amendment that grants equal protection to all people. And as long as we say that corporations are people, then you can't be told what to do by any courts or any laws, essentially.
Yeah, and that's also right around the time when the entire system starts careening off of the rails. It's not as though major corporations haven't always existed, but the form that they exist in now, that's around the time when this is starting to germinate.
Oh, and the first populist movement that people look back to for inspiration now comes out of that. It comes out of the anger at that.
And to the point about Hunter Biden, we were talking about how none of this matters if the media doesn't care. And if it doesn't matter if the ruling class doesn't care. I mean, people can get really angry and upset about it and it can inspire these populist movements, but we can all know that this is happening plain as day. But unless anybody cares, it just continues and continues and continues. The cycle continues. Their power increases and increases. And then we get to the point where we are right now in 2021, where we're talking about the president of the United States. You could even talk about the former president of the United States being in those situations. Now, Mitch McConnell also had this to say about infrastructure talks.
So there is a process by which they could pass this bill without a single Republican. But we're going to make it hard for them. And there are a few Democrats left in rural America and some others who would like to be more in the political center who may find this offensive. But all of this is going to play out.
So he's talking about West Virginia and Arizona there, right?
Yeah, more or less. He's probably given up on John Tester and Tammy Baldwin, which is interesting because, and even Warnock and Ossoff, we take for granted that if you're in a Republican-leaning or a swing state like West Virginia or Arizona, that these are difficult political decisions for you. If they're so difficult, why don't we hear Warnock, Ossoff, Baldwin, and Tester's names more often?
I know.
They seem just fine with all of this.
Right.
They're not paying a price.
Right. And that's it's a really good point. And it's McConnell talking like that is a pretty incredible statement on our times, that he's like, well, there are a few Democrats left in rural America, so we're going to make it very difficult for particular people to take these votes. But there are only two people that he's really going to make it difficult for them to take those votes. Nobody is going to be afraid. Tammy Baldwin, great example, not going to be afraid to take a vote on the bipartisan infrastructure deal. It's not to say I don't think there's some bad stuff in that bill, but the way that that's going to play in rural Wisconsin, it's not what Mitch McConnell is talking about. Right. He's talking about West Virginia, he's talking about Arizona, and he can't really make it difficult. I don't really think he can on the bipartisan bill. I think he can obviously make the reconciliation bill a very, very difficult vote, and that's where things are going to get difficult for your Joe Manchins and for your Sinemas. But this bipartisan bill, Republicans are essentially powerless over.
And I think he was mostly referring to the reconciliation one there. Ironically, he's losing some of his touch because every time he comes out and says we're going to make this a partisan issue for Democrats and make it harder for them to do it, it makes it easier for them to do it.
Right.
It makes it easier for Manchin and Sinema to say, well, if McConnell's just going to turn this into a partisan affair, then okay, I guess it's partisan.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, partisanship doesn't exactly play well with people who just want especially on the infrastructure issue. That's probably the most important issue where partisanship fails utterly because it's the issue where it's like, we want to see our government work for us, get stuff done, and provide the very basics. Roads, clean water, et cetera, down the line, and to see partisan obstruction, even if it's just, really hyped up by messaging, that on infrastructure, it's not going to play well.
No, I don't think it will.
Coming up, we will tell you what America is thinking.